thousands of pounds of sizzling potato chips an hour. Machines that wrap candy faster than the eye can see. Plants that chill millions of gallons of ice cream a year. The snack food industry believes in outsized productivity and speed. And it shows no signs of slowing down.
I always think machines are so fast, I don't know how we'll ever go faster. And 3 or 4 or 5 years later, we're able to design new machinery that can go faster.
It's taken faster machines to keep pace with consumers' demands.
50 years ago, snacks were not the grab-and-go product that they are today. Now they are everywhere in every form that you can imagine. They fit in your cup holders. They fit in your lunchbox. They fit in your sport coat. They fit wherever you are, whatever you are.
And profits have followed productivity.
In the United States, about $20 to $25 billion worth of confectionery products are sold every year.
That's a lot of candy, but it takes 24 pounds of candy a year to satisfy the average American sweet tooth. Mars Incorporated, the private company that makes Snickers, Milky Way, and M&Ms, has sales of $16 billion worldwide. An army of warm nougat and caramel marches down a conveyor belt, while hundreds of feet ahead, a flood of chocolate awaits.
Those bars are actually going to flow under a waterfall or a curtain of chocolate, someplace that we probably would all like to do sometime in our lives.
Although there's a fantastic aspect to a candy plant that immediately conjures Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, what goes on inside is hardly child's play.
Overall in this plant, we make over 30 million pieces of candy a day. It's a tremendous amount of volume. That would equate to maybe close to 100,000 metric tons a year of product.
It's impossible to know where it all began, but certainly humankind's sweet tooth predates recorded history.
The first caveman, when he went out there looking for something tasty and realized that honey was sweet, and maybe took a stick and poked it in there, you could say that could be the theoretical origin of lollipops, right? Honey on a stick.
Ancient Egyptians, Arabs, and Chinese all made confections from nuts and fruits candied in honey. And by the 17th century, the English were making treats out of boiled sugar. The other mother lode for the world's sweet tooth was the discovery of chocolate. Cocoa trees, the source of chocolate, were being cultivated in Mesoamerica several thousand years ago by the Maya. In 1519, the Aztec ruler Montezuma served Cortez a golden goblet full of a drink called chocolatl, a spiced concoction of ground cocoa beans. Cortez returned to Spain with both the drink's recipe and a supply of beans. Sweetened with cane sugar, the chocolate drink was a hit among European aristocracy.
People started to drink it, and during that time frame, all sorts of weird things were mixed with it. There's some historical information that people mixed blood with it, they mixed licorice with it, they mixed all sorts of things.
But it would take another 300 years for Europeans to manufacture a creamy, solid chocolate. In 1828, C.J. van Houten, a Dutch chocolate maker, invented a manual cocoa press that made this possible. At the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, Milton Hershey purchased German chocolate-making machinery and began producing chocolate bars in his Lancaster, Pennsylvania factory in 1894. The mass-produced American chocolate bar was born.
Milton Hershey is credited with kind of creating the candy bar in the United States. He took milk chocolate and started selling them for a nickel apiece.
Since those early days, demand for cocoa has never waned. Today, it's grown and harvested as it has been for hundreds of years.
This pod will sit right onto a branch. It'll sit something like that. And how it's harvested is pretty simplistic. A machete comes by, chops it right off, pod falls to the ground. They take that same machete, chop it, split it open, and inside the pod is something called the placenta. It's a very wet, moist bean. Doesn't even look like a bean.
The beans are fermented to bring out their flavor, and then shipped to, among other places, the U.S. division of Mars Incorporated, Master Foods USA. At the factory, the beans are cleaned, roasted, shelled, and ground into a liquid called chocolate liqueur. Presses separate this liquid into cocoa powder and cocoa butter. Chocolate liqueur and additional cocoa butter are the main ingredients of chocolate. Milk solids, sweeteners, and flavors are added to the mix, which is then blended to distribute the cocoa fat in the chocolate. This process is much the same today as it was in 1923, when Frank C. Mars introduced the Milky Way, the nation's first filled candy bar. Mars was a successful candy salesman who had started his business with his wife, Ethel, in their Tacoma, Washington kitchen. But it was the popularity of the chocolate malted milkshake that gave Mars the idea of creating a portable bite-sized version. The Milky Way bar was an overnight sensation. Mars Incorporated was born. But Frank Mars needed a large plant to keep pace with the demand for his new product.
The reason he chose Chicago was because of its national distribution potential, rail access in and out, bringing raw materials in to make the product, as well as being able to ship the product out by rail.
The history of this particular plant is that we really began production in 1929 with the Milky Way bar, certainly followed in 1930 by the Snickers, and then Three Musketeers bars in 1932.
At the plant, candy manufacture, though scaled up, was still a handmade single-batch process.
If you look at the Chicago factory, and if you look at what it would have been like in the 1930s, it's much like what your kitchen is today, except on a larger scale. Those were mechanical items physically done by hand, which would require someone to mix it first. Then they would have to put the product on a slab, lay that out by hand. They literally would then take a cutter and cut the product by hand. So the continuous processing was the big change that really was the leap forward in being able to mass produce the candy products.
Continuous processing, a series of machines in sequence that move product from mixing through wrapping without stopping, came to the plant in 1947. Today, this process is still used to make all Master Foods products, from M&Ms to Milky Way to these Snickers bars, named after the Mars family's favorite horse.
The first process is really the whipping of egg white, along with some cooked corn syrup, which includes some salt and some water, and sugar, because we want a high impact of a peanut flavor in Snickers. We're adding fresh ground peanut butter to that mixture. We can't have a great Snickers bar without having great caramel. And it comes into this area, into the blender, where it's now being blended with our own fresh roasted peanuts.
Although the process may look simple, it's not.
Time and temperature are very, very critical components. And for us, monitoring those closely, as well as even basic things like humidity, which could cause the candy to become very sticky and difficult to handle, are all very critical. For a line like this that has a capacity of making, 50 or 60 tons of product a shift, you can imagine if one of those parameters would get out of control, you'd have quite a sticky mess in your hands.
The 195-degree nougat flows downstairs and into a hopper. It's then squeezed between two ice-cold stainless steel rollers.
And the material spreads out into a slab that then is peeled off of those rollers and laid down onto a stainless steel belt to be further cooled. And then head towards the area where we can actually put caramel on top.
The combined slab will be cooled further to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, so that it can be cut cleanly into strips the exact width of a Snickers bar, without chocolate on it. The caramel and nougat slab is now warm for enrobing. That's industry speak for getting its chocolate covering. The chocolate has been tempered, heated, and cooled in a way that ensures a more uniform crystallization of cocoa butter within the chocolate, resulting in a higher melting point,
which makes that chocolate easier to handle in your hands at room temperature and at body temperature. Really what we want is we want that chocolate to melt in your mouth, but not in your hands.
Then the bars are vibrated to rid them of air bubbles and to evenly distribute the chocolate. The tempering process continues as the bars head toward wrapping. The Snickers bars receive a final inspection before being wrapped at rates of between 800 and 900 bars per minute. The results of all this work from Master Foods is a spectacular payoff.
The Snicker bar, while invented in 1930, today is one of the top-selling confectionery brands in the world, $2 billion in global sales.
But Snickers is only one of the company's many brands, which include M&M's, Twix, Starburst, Skittles, Milky Way, Kudos, and Three Musketeers. At the Chicago plant, they also make the newest product, the Amazing Bar, a molded milk chocolate bar with embedded M&M's minis. And Poppables, candy bars in a bite-sized format. The company is privately held and run by the fourth generation of the Mars family. With products sold in over 100 countries, they come a long way from Frank and Ethel Mars's kitchen. Creativity in the kitchen was also the genesis of this popular snack. Potato chips are made from special potatoes, and more of them are grown here in this potato chip powerhouse state than anywhere else. And no, it's not Idaho. Americans eat $24 billion worth of savory snacks a year. That's loads of potato chips, corn chips, pretzels, and just about anything you can put salt on. 9 of the 10 top-selling brands are made by one company, Frito-Lay, the biggest player in the industry.
Even though you have one large national player, you do have dozens of strong, mostly family-owned regional companies.
Pennsylvania, the chipping potato state. That moniker probably won't replace the state motto, but the area around Hanover and York in southeastern Pennsylvania is nicknamed the Potato Chip Belt. For a reason. Not just any old potato is fit to become a potato chip. They're bred specifically for that purpose, to be round and to have low moisture content. Water has to be cooked out, and too much of it leads to a bland-tasting chip. Although the potato was discovered and cultivated by pre-Columbian farmers in the Andes Mountains, it took several thousand years for someone to stumble on the idea for the potato chip. In 1853, George Crumb was working as a chef at the upscale Moon Lake Lodge in Saratoga Springs, New York. The quick-tempered chef was insulted when a patron returned some French fries because they were too thick. In response, Crumb cut the potatoes thin as paper, fried them to a crisp, and sent them back to the table. Of course, the chips were a hit.
He created a brand new product. There was no R&D involved with it. It was totally impulsive. The ingredients involved with this was anger and maybe a little bit of exacting of revenge.
By the 20th century, people began frying chips in their kitchens and selling them locally. This was especially prevalent in southeastern Pennsylvania.
They tended to have the entrepreneurial spirit, independent, some people would say hard-headed, but they'd like to be on their own and be self-sufficient. They were growing potatoes, plus the capital expenditure to get into the business with those early, very simple equipment and production methods was low cost and easy.
In 1921, Butts Quality Foods in Hanover, Pennsylvania was launched with this combination of modest expense and hard work.
My grandfather, William Butts, was a factory worker at Hanover Shoe in Hanover, and Sally, his wife, was a homemaker. Bill heard about a older gentleman in York, Pennsylvania, who had a small chip kettle that wanted to get out of the business, so he quit his job at Hanover Shoe, scraped the other $300, bought the equipment, and brought it to their home in downtown Hanover. So from that point, Grandma Sally began cooking the chips, and Bill would go door to door selling them.
By 1930, Hanover Home Brand Potato Chip, as the company was called at the time, expanded to a building behind the house. By 1936, their automatic potato chip cooker was frying 300 pounds of chips an hour. This early cooker was a quantum leap forward. But nothing compared to this contemporary $5.2 million fryer.
We're now
at the beginning of one of our continuous fryers. This is our biggest fryer. It's capable of doing 4,200 pounds of chips in an hour.
Before the chips hit the oil, the potatoes must be sorted.
One of the things a lot of people don't realize is we have to sort the potatoes into various sizes in order to get those potatoes in the bags. You use big potatoes for big bags and small potatoes for small bags.
These potatoes, a variety called Snowdens, are pumped into the plant in a flume of water that efficiently washes them as it moves them. It takes 4 pounds of potatoes to make a pound of chips.
This is a modern peeler. There are a series of drums where we can adjust the abrasive inside those drums. Depending on the kind of potato and the toughness of the skin, we will literally rub the outside off.
Peels aren't wasted. They'll be sold for animal feed. Once peeled, the potatoes are off to the slicer, a spinning ring of surgical steel blades set with a micrometer to a slice thickness of between 0.045 and 0.065 inches for their various chips. After excess moisture is blown off, they're carried into a bath in 2,800 gallons of 350-degree cottonseed oil.
There are actually hold-down belts that are inside this continuous fryer that push the slices down into the oil, and then there are paddles on those belts so that they bring those slices along and turn them into chips as they come through the hot oil.
Salt is added to the chips as they come out of the fryer, and they're immediately inspected.
Right after the chips are salted, they go through a machine that actually sorts out the dark chips or the chips that have blemishes. This machine has cameras in it and is set so that when it detects any kind of blemish or dark spot, it hits that chip with a puff of air and puts it down into a channel to have it removed from the stream of chips.
Pickers will then inspect the chips again before they fall into buckets on the weigh scales.
The weight in each bucket is registered on a computer, and then the exact combination of buckets are opened up to get the weight in the bag within 1 gram of what is called for.
The bags are flushed with nitrogen before the chips go in. They'll last 5 weeks longer in a nitrogen environment than they would in oxygen, up to 8 weeks on the shelf. Utz makes 1 million pounds of potato chips a week in over 100 varieties, including old-fashioned hand-cooked chips.
As far as hand-cooked potato chips, we have a broader range of varieties than anybody in the industry, with offerings cooked in cottonseed oil, peanut oil, hydrogenated shortening, primarily soybean shortening, and lard, which a lot of people would think would not be appealing, but there's a very strong demand in central Pennsylvania for a lard-based product.
Down the road from Utz is Snyder's of Hanover, which began in 1909 as a regional company and has become the largest pretzel bakery in the country. Founded by Harry V. Wareheim, Hanover Pretzel Company had at the time one product, a soft pretzel. Growth was slow and steady, but things really took off in the 60s with the purchase of a hard pretzel recipe. In the early 70s, Michael Wareheim, Harry's grandson and the company's current chairman, began testing the idea of calling the company's hard pretzel sourdough.
And it was really once they named the product Sourdough Hard Pretzels and Mike adopted a box format for packaging the product that they started to be able to gain distribution really across the United States throughout the 80s, and it became the country's #1 selling pretzels through the mid-90s.
Although Snyder's roots can be traced to the early 20th century, the pretzel's origins go back much further.
We can trace the roots of pretzels back to 610 AD, when monks in a monastery in southern France came up with the idea of utilizing the scraps left over from baking fresh bread. What he was basically trying to do was create the shape of children's arms folded in prayer.
It was known as a pretiola, Latin for little reward, and was given to children once they had said their prayers. It doesn't take much to make a pretzel. Take some dough, twist it, bake it, and presto, you've got a pretzel. But what if you wanted to make tons of pretzels an hour?
Over here, we're in our twister section. This is where we make our sourdough hard pretzels. We're taking a chunk of dough, putting it in the hopper of this unit. In this hopper, there's also an auger that extrudes out a dough ball. It's rolled out between a series of rollers. Once we get a noodle rolled, there's two mechanical fingers that actually hand tie the pretzel.
That takes us from maybe 100 pounds an hour that might have been expected in the 30s when this first automation hit the category to today where we'll produce in many of these ovens over 2,000 pounds an hour.
It'll take between 7 and 15 minutes for these pretzels to reach the oven. During that time, yeast converts fermentable sugars in the dough into the leavening gas, carbon dioxide, causing the dough to rise.
We're doing two things in an oven. You're baking in the top zone, and in the bottom zone of the oven is a kiln or dry zone. During the baking process, you're also developing flavor and aroma at that point in time. Once you get to the end of the oven, you drop your product into a kiln zone, which is a drying zone.
The pretzels, which started with between 46 and 48% moisture, have had that baked down to between 16 and 19% in the top of the oven. In the bottom kiln zone, that will drop to between 4 and 5%. Then the pretzels will be cooled, packaged, and palletized, stacked on pallets, to be shipped to markets in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Pacific Rim countries, and North and South America. Efficiently marketing to the world begins here.
This palletizing unit was installed in August of 2002. It was a capital investment of close to $2.5 million, and we clearly had the good justification to pay that back from a labor efficiency within a couple years. The system is capable of handling about 45 to 60 cases per minute. In a lot of cases, that may translate into about 25 to 28,000 cases per shift.
Snyder's has expanded into organic pretzels and over 30 different varieties of pretzels, flavors, shapes, and forms.
With such pretzel flavors as honey barbecue, cheddar cheese, buttermilk ranch, jalapeno pieces, and hot buffalo wings. Hey, that's a lot of spice for a 1,400-year-old snack. Compared to pretzels, this treat's a youngster, and it's having an identity crisis. It's not really just a chocolate, and not totally a caramel, and it's not quite a fudge, but it just keeps going and going and going. Candies have always been made with the same basics: sweeteners, flavors, and colors. Yes, artificial flavors and colors have made them tastier and brighter, but candy recipes have tended to last. And so have the names on the boxes. 65% of American candy brands have been around for more than 50 years. Few have been popular as long as Tootsie Roll. Introduced in 1896, it's more than 100 years old.
Well, Tootsie Roll started as a wrapped penny piece, and to this day, we do have a very small Tootsie Roll that is a wrapped penny piece.
But don't be fooled by its unassuming appearance and modest price. This candy has spawned a confectionery empire. The output at the Chicago Tootsie Roll plant is staggering. They make 83 million Tootsie Rolls a day, 16 million Mason Dots, and about 20 million lollipops. Tootsie Roll Industries grosses approximately $400 million a year. But like most candy companies, it had modest origins. Austrian immigrant Leo Hirschfeld brought his recipe for a chocolate chewy candy to New York City and began manufacture in 1896. He dubbed his sweet Tootsie, his 5-year-old daughter's nickname.
It wasn't quite a bar of chocolate, and it wasn't quite a caramel, and yet it also wasn't quite a piece of fudge. It was a blend of all of those.
You had hundreds of candy shops where they would be making hard candy and soft candy basically by boiling sugar in the back of their shops, and in the front of them they would start to sell their products.
By 1905, the Tootsie Roll was established in an already crowded candy marketplace.
Tootsie Rolls were cooked on the top of a building, and the candy was cooked in open kettles on sunny days, and on rainy days they couldn't cook. As time went on, the people who actually worked in Tootsie Roll began to invent machinery that could begin to cut the candy, instead of by hand, by some automated machines. And later on, machines became faster and faster. Today, Tootsie Roll manufacturing is completely automated.
We are in the Tootsie Roll process kitchen. We have a total of 6 Tootsie Roll cookers here and 3 mixes: cocoa, oil, corn syrup, sweetened condensed milk, and we are cooking about 10,000 pounds an hour right now on these 2 cookers.
The mixture is then slowly cooled on this wheel to temper the Tootsie Roll and give it its familiar texture.
If you cool it too quickly, it becomes rock hard. If you don't cool it quickly enough, it'll never set up.
Chocolate may be the most familiar flavor, but it's not the only one. The plant also makes 17 different Tootsie Roll flavors, including grape, orange, and cherry. The mixing process for fruit flavors is the same, but the cocoa is replaced with artificial flavors and colors. After mixing and a 30-minute cool-off, the roll passes through an extruder and becomes this slab. No, it's not the latest in supersizing. It's simply the building block from which all Tootsie Rolls are made.
This extruder basically puts it into a 13-pound Tootsie Roll. And we use that 13-pound Tootsie Roll for the basis of all of our wrapping machines.
The slab is conveyed into the high-speed wrapping area, where it's pulled and squeezed to the width of a Tootsie Roll.
Comes through and gets cut, and then these grippers hold on to it and pass it on to this next set of grippers, which already have a wrapped Tootsie Roll paper around it, and there's 2 twister barrels that come and twist the ends of the Tootsie Roll.
This all happens at a rate of 1,500 pieces per minute, 3 times as fast as 10 years ago. The machines better get faster because over the years, the Tootsie Roll line of brands has continued to expand through invention and acquisition to include Dots, Crows, Sellas, Chocolate-Covered Cherries, Charleston Chew, Fluffy Stuffed Cotton Candies, Andes Candies, and the Charms line of lollipops. The combination of the Charms line and Tootsie Pops makes Tootsie the largest lollipop producer in the world. Tootsie Pops are cooked, cooled, and stretched like Tootsie Rolls. But the actual mechanics of the lollipop-making machine are a secret. Once stick, Tootsie Center, and candy shell are combined, the lollipop must be cooled.
This is a fresh Tootsie Roll Pop, and as you can tell, it's well formed, but it's very, very soft. And we have to cool it very carefully, because if we let it rest on one side or another, it will become flat.
We realize that there's a battle between your tongue and your teeth. You want to lick it, but you want to bite it.
Mr. Turtle, how many licks does it take to get through the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop?
Why, he's never made it without biting. Ask Mr. Owl.
Let's find out. 1, 2, 3.
We get many letters from consumers who tick off and count how many licks it took. And there have been some very sophisticated experiments. Graduate students at Purdue University, chemical engineers, decided to build a mechanical tongue, and they did so. And they came up with 317 licks.
That's a lot of licks. But there's little doubt that Tootsie Roll is still going strong and can definitely take a licking. But these snacks have to take a beating. They will be inverted, injected, and drowned. The violent process behind making a cupcake. Each year, Americans spend $4.2 billion on something the industry calls snack cakes. That comes to 13.5 billion cupcakes, fruit pies, Twinkies, donuts. You name it, we're eating it.
Snack cakes in general have moved out of an area of just for a pastry in the morning to an all-day opportunity to snack.
Key keep up with consumption, baking companies have scaled up production and consolidated, growing beyond their small-town roots.
Most baking companies started out as a small regional bakery, but the customers changed. Retailers consolidated as well and became much larger retail chains, and it kind of drove suppliers to consolidate.
Ever larger retailers opted for the one-stop shopping efficiencies of buying from ever larger bakeries.
We're running 42,000 cupcakes an hour, and we have a capacity to run 5 million cupcakes a week.
5 million cupcakes. That takes a lot of the basics, flour and sugar.
There's 50,000 pounds of sugar that comes in on the truck and unloaded into the bulk silo, which can hold 120,000 pounds each. We're using approximately 450,000 pounds of granulated sugar a week.
At Flowers Foods' Crossville, Tennessee plant, they make 64 varieties of cupcakes, cream cakes, pecan twirls, brownies, cinnamon rolls, honey buns, and snowballs. If Flowers cupcakes look familiar, it's because many players in the industry make similar products. Flowers, which started in 1919 when William and Joseph Flowers opened their first bakery in Thomasville, Georgia, now boasts 34 bakeries. The original site made headlines by producing 30,000 loaves of bread a day.
To put that into perspective, one of our new generation bakeries can produce 170,000 loaves of bread.
If you look at snack foods, it's gone largely from what was a single batch process producing a few dozen or a few hundred maybe to continuous process that's thousands of pounds an hour.
Continuous process technology is in full swing at Flowers Crossville, Tennessee bakery, which makes more than 80 million pounds of product annually. The company's AutoBake inline system runs 724 feet from mixing to packaging.
There's two processes to our mixing process. There's the primary mixing process where the ingredients are blended together. Then there's the continuous mixer where air is injected in and we're trying to maintain the same specific gravity so that we can keep a consistent volume of the finished product.
The amount of injected air depends on the desired specific gravity or density. More for a cream cake and less for a denser cupcake. The cupcake mix will stay in a holding tank for 27 minutes at 68 degrees. This will allow the baking powder to leaven the dough to the proper consistency.
One thing that makes baking, I think, more complex than some other food ingredients is bakery materials, before they go through the oven, are active, living, moving things. If you're dealing with a dough that has yeast in it and fermentation, that dough is continually changing from the time it's mixed until you get it through the process. So you can't just make a huge batch and work on it all day. You've got to be timing everything through.
The depositor pumps 1.4 ounces of batter for each cupcake. 700 cupcakes a minute, more than 3,600 pounds of batter an hour. Then the pans are conveyed into a very unconventional oven.
The difference between this oven and a conventional oven is the size or the footprint of the oven. This oven is a much more compact oven. It's a 40-foot long oven by 3 feet wide. It produces as much as a 120-foot frontal oven 12-foot wide.
That's because the pans move vertically, shaking back and forth for 18 minutes through the oven's 4 cooking zones, with heats ranging from 350 to 535 degrees. And there's no fire in this oven. 575-degree thermal oil circulates through a closed system, conserving energy. After leaving the oven at 193 degrees, the cupcakes cool for 25 minutes. At 98 degrees, they're ready to be injected with creamy filling. Temperature control is critical.
If the product is too cold, the cake will break, and if the product is too hot, then the cream will liquefy.
Then the pans are inverted, dumping their cargo. At this point, pans and cupcakes part ways. Cupcakes onward for icing, and pans backward to be cleaned and returned to the beginning of the line. There, they will be greased and refilled with batter to begin the process anew. The cupcakes then pass under 130-degree chocolate icing and a drizzle of white string icing. Now, only a 200-foot tempering tunnel awaits them. The Cupcakes will cool to 70 degrees by the time they reach packing. Eight automated packing machines package between 70 and 110 units per minute, but there's still a place for human intervention.
That's one of our quality control points. It allows us to visually inspect the product to make sure it's up to our standards. It allows us to place the product in the packaging, keep the string icing design in line in the package.
Flowers bakeries strive to stay competitive because they must go head-to-head with the largest wholesale baker in the country, Interstate Bakeries, which owns the Hostess brand.
Approximately 500 million Twinkies are consumed each year in the United States. So divide that by 365, and I think it's about 1.369 million a day.
And like anything this famous, Twinkies have had to suffer the slings and arrows of quite a few urban legends, including one about not being baked.
Twinkies are a baked product. They're not a chemically engineered product. They're baked. They've always been baked. Another urban legend is that a Twinkie will survive a nuclear holocaust. I don't know that to be true or false, and certainly would not hope to ever find out that.
If Twinkies couldn't survive, this product certainly wouldn't. Ice cream has to be pampered just to make it to the grocery store unharmed. $20 billion a year U.S. ice cream industry produces 1.4 billion gallons of ice cream and frozen desserts, which Americans are gobbling up at a rate of 20 quarts per person per annum. The largest ice cream manufacturer in the United States, Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream, operates 7 plants. Its Bakersfield, California facility makes 55 million dozens of frozen snacks and 6.5 million gallons of packaged ice cream on a yearly basis.
We'll do in excess of 2,000 liters in an hour, just because of the sheer scale of what our freezers are capable of. And now if we bundle multiple freezers together, it becomes a scale-up process on how much you can make in a day.
The ice cream flavors in today's grocery stores have changed quite a bit since William Dreyer and Joseph Eady formed the company in 1928. The ice cream maker and candy maker partnered at a time when there were really only 3 flavors: vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. In 1929, their first successful creation was a product of their combined talents. Dreyer mixed nuts and marshmallows with ice cream to make what the partners dubbed Rocky Road, a reference to the tough times facing the country during the Depression. It was a hit and remains a bestseller. And it launched a company that has steadily expanded distribution and production.
So now in the mixer, this is where the ice cream mixes are put together. And we have 2 systems here, a 2,500 gallon an hour system and a 4,000 gallon an hour system. An ice cream mix, you usually use some cream, some condensed milk, some liquid sugar, some corn syrup, some stabilizers and emulsifiers.
That basic mix is homogenized and pumped out to the production floor to be flavored.
These are flavor vats behind me. They're attached to an ice cream freezer. At this location, we take the unflavored mix, we add a flavor base to it. In this instance, we're adding a strawberry base.
Then it's off to the freezer, where it will become ice cream.
It starts over here with a continuous ice cream freezer. It takes the mix from approximately 40 degrees down to 28 degrees. Also during that process, we add some air just to make the ice cream smooth and creamy.
Blades inside the freezer scrape 300 to 400 gallons of ice cream an hour off the grill and pump it through in a continuous process. The ice cream, in this case vanilla, isn't destined for a half-gallon container. It will become the creamy center of a Dreyer's fruit bar. After the orange fruit mix is dispensed, frozen on the outside, and the excess extracted from the middle of the mold, it's vanilla time.
So once the ice cream goes into the filler, then it's just fixed into each of these lanes. There are 16 lanes in each row here. This particular machine makes over 20,000 ice cream bars an hour. And it continues to freeze as it moves around the table. It gets harder and harder. The timing of the whole process is very critical. It comes around at just the right time. The ice cream is hard enough to hold the stick, but not so hard that we couldn't get the stick to insert.
In the extraction zone, the table heats up from 40 below to 0 degrees. This warming melts the surface of the bar and allows it to be extracted.
Here we have a water dipping station that helps stabilize the outer surface with water freezing colder than the mix. And secondly, it adds a little snap when you bite into the first bite of the bar.
Dreyer's drumstick process is more complex, and as a result, a mere 9,600 drumsticks can be made in an hour.
So we start with our cone, and we convey it forward first to the chocolate spray station. We spray a layer of chocolate around the top rim and down the side of the cone. Several of our drumsticks have a center core that's either caramel or fudge or chocolate. And what you can't see inside the nozzle is it's actually a nozzle within a nozzle. So as the ice cream is being dispensed into the cone, a valve opens and it injects one of those three flavors into the inside of the top of the cone. So by your third bite into the drumstick, you should either get your caramel or your chocolate fudge center.
From here, the cones go into a freezer for 20 minutes. Their temperature drops from the mid-20s to 0.
So once it comes out of that environment, we dip it in chocolate and we dip it in the nuts. And then it travels on down, it's individually packaged and then sent off to our storage.
The Bakersfield plant currently makes over 90 different flavors, shapes, and configurations of ice cream snacks. And though the snack food industry has certainly been imaginative in providing variety, there have been costs for consumers.
Snacks have become less of a snack and more of a grab-and-go, eat-anytime product. And that's kind of been the downfall of Americans with the obesity crisis. They can eat whatever they want, wherever they want. Manufacturers have answered their call for convenience to excess.
Ultimately, consumers determine what they put into their mouths. And some say the more natural, the better.
A processed food typically is devoid of moisture, devoid of natural fibers, devoid of gums, devoid of vitamins and minerals unless they're processed chemicals that are then added back in. Apple or any other piece of fruit is loaded with fiber, natural gums, natural pectin, natural moisture. What we know about apples is that they are perfect in their natural state.
But much of the time when we're reaching for a snack, we're reaching for a guilty pleasure. And what hits the spot is a chocolatey, chewy, crunchy, creamy bit of heaven.